afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining us today. Hope you're all well and that you all had a fabulous week so far. My name is Emile Genest. I'm the WOCPSCN International JazzyJZ President, and I'm sincerely excited to being here today. And I'm also grateful for the amazing opportunity to meeting you all and for you to meet our wonderful panel and amazing speakers. So our conversation today will focus on how various aspects of intergenerational, interpersonal, and intercultural communication skills can support women, while also discussing how women communication skills improve gender equity. So please allow me to introduce to you our moderator for today's conversation, who is none of than the amazing and fabulous WOCPSCN's founders, Executive Director, Miss Loretta Green-Williams. So Miss Loretta is not only the heart and soul of our exciting organization, I can also and honestly say her passion, her positive vibes, and mostly her energy are out of this world. And I cannot wait for you to meet her. While being our amazing founder, Miss Loretta Green-Williams is also the founder of the Caribbean Diaspora Professional and Business Association, the founder of USF Sisters Connection, and founder of Caribbean Magazine. She is also the past president of the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and former executive director of the Ethiopian Cultural Community Center. Being a human rights advocate certified by the US Diplomacy and Human Rights Institute, a certified global Goodwill Ambassador, and member of the Goodwill Ambassador Foundation. Ms. Loretta also holds an international communication certification and mindful management negotiation, and is an ordained minister through KIA and NACM. It goes without saying that Ms. Loretta's journey is sincerely inspirational, and her expertise and as an entrepreneur and post-colonial theorist also make her truly sought-after public and motivational speaker. So please join me in welcoming Miss Loretta Green-Williams.
Thank you, Millie. Thank you, everyone, and welcome everyone. On behalf of Women of Concerned Professionals and Strategic Conscious Networking, I want to thank you so very much for giving us this pleasure of your time as we speak on a very interesting topic for International Women's History Month. Now, this is the first time in history that there has been 4 to 5 generations working side by side. The traditional generation born before 1945, baby boomers, 1946 to 1964, Generation X, 1965 to 1980, Generation Y, 1981 to 1995, and the linkster generation, born after 1995. While each generation has its own style of communications, intergenerational networking differs from their challenges as well as their advantages. Intergenerational business styles and structures can enhance a business environment or limit shared ideas and insights into business building. Now, because JazzyJZ's mentoring program is designed to provide support for young businesswomen through the wisdom of seasoned businesswomen, this intergenerational discussion will consider business interpersonal and intercultural communication skills effectiveness. In honor of Women's History Month, JazzyJZ will consider how women's communication skills improve gender equity and what aspects of intergenerational communication support in such growth. Our first speaker is our own board of trustee member, Dr. Corinne Holder-Jackson. She's executive director at ACCEL in San Mateo County, California. She is also holds the Global Goodwill Ambassador of North America, and as well as being the executive director, she is a dynamic, innovative speaker and executive. She has expertise in leadership training and development, strategic planning, and organizational development. As a former associate director of the American Diabetes Association, San Francisco Bay Area, Dr. Corinne received honors as a recipient of the Certified of Special Congressional Recognition in 2015 from the Honorable Barbara Lee, 13th Congressional District of California. We'd like to welcome and we honor the presence of Dr. Holder Jackson.
Thank you so much, Loretta, and thank you for having me as a panelist. I'm so happy to be here today and to share with you about the art of communication and having the opportunity to speak with job seekers amongst this multi-generational environment that we're in now. And in this post-COVID environment and even pre-COVID, many of the, I would say the pain points that I would receive from employers and also from job seekers is communication. And so I believe John Maxwell wrote a book that so eloquently states it, that everyone communicates, but few people connect. And so there was so little connection between people. Our millennials would sit next to each other in cubicles, but they wouldn't step out of that space or lean over to the side and say, hey, can I connect with you for just a moment? I want to run this by you. They would IM each other, or they would send text messages. And I never kind of really understood how they would do that. And even when they called huddles, where they would get together and have a team meeting, there was very little communication actually going on. It would be the facts, and this is what we need to do. And even though they would ask for input, the input wouldn't happen in the huddle. The input would happen as they left to go back to their offices or back to their desks or their cubicles, and then the IMing would start. And so I don't know if that's a part of the generations growing up with technology. I don't know if it's now in this post-COVID world, because we've all had to pivot and shift to Zoom. Sure. But what we really must focus on is that I believe the key to overcoming that challenge is if we understand the personalities that we're dealing with. Some people have very, what I call I'm a just behavioral analyst, so on a very scale of very engaging. They love to chat. When you go in to communicate with them, please don't start with business. Start with how was their day, how was their evening, oh, I see, how's the kids? Give them about 5 minutes, and then you can ease into the conversation and you will have their attention. But there are other people who are, give me the facts, only the facts. They'll come in asking me about my day, what happened last night, even what happened this morning. Be brief, summarize what you want, tell me what you need, and that's it. And people react differently under stress as well. And right now we're in a stressful situation. I know here in my world, I am now trying to get together with my teammates to forecast a 3-year strategy. They're asking us to create targets for how we are going to grow our programs across our K-12 adults, and then how we're going to progress our ESL students through different levels of learning English language acquisition, and then how we're going to progress them and transition them either to high school diploma, GED, or to career technical education, and then how are we going to make sure that those who have gone that pathway are now going to get a job at the end? Are we taking them to jobs at the end? Well, we're in a state of uncertainty. How are we supposed to do that? And so I'm noticing as we're having conversations that people's personality behaviors are changing due to the level of stress that they feel, which then alters the conversation. And so now, in everything that we have to be concerned with in our communication, we now have to ask our multi-generational workforce to think about these things. That's just one added layer, because it's a difficult time to work in COVID right now. And so I'm going to be asking people who are working in this environment that we have to give everyone in our environment just a little bit more grace, because we're all trying to adjust and adapt to this ever-changing, stressful, at times, environment.
Thank you, Dr. Corinne. Thank you so very much. So we want to open it up for questions, comments, and concerns. And while you prepare for your question, the first thing I'd like to ask you, you did bring up the aspect that the use of technical devices in reference to communication skills, which is very critical for the last 3 generations that have come before our generation. What do you think some of the advantages and disadvantages of communicating in that capacity?
Definitely the advantages is the speed of communication. And we can communicate now. People can send me a text while I'm on Zoom with you. Or people can send me a quick email and I can respond faster than if they picked up the phone and they were to call me, or if they wanted to come in to my office and chat. But the disadvantage is you can tell a lot from what people don't say, or from body language, or just from the way that the person enters into the room. You can tell a lot about the communication that they're conveying, even during the time that they're actually speaking and communicating. So that's an advantage of having the face-to-face and an advantage of having the technology, but yet it still puts us sometimes at a disadvantage, because sometimes when we text message or we email and we're under a little bit of stress, sometimes the way that that message comes across can come across in a negative way when it really wasn't meant to be so.
Interesting. Yeah, I find that too. Sometimes when you read it, you're not sure of the content of the voice. And I'm going, what do they mean? Yeah, so that is a big challenge. I can see that. Does anyone have any questions, comments, and concerns for Dr. Corinne? Excellent. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Corinne. We know that you have a busy schedule. Now, Dr. Corinne is in California, so trust me. This has been a challenge, and she's prepping for work. So we thank you so very much for being a part of us today. Thank you so very much.
Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Dr. Corinne. All righty. So thank you so very much for that conversation. I think what we can pull out of that is how the technical information is translated. I think that's something that we can move forward on a conversation as well. So as we look at this intercultural, intergenerational, interpersonal aspects of discourse, I'd like to bring our next speaker, which is Anne Vivaldi. She is a senior partner leading projects on disruptive growth innovation strategies. She has many, many years of experience in regards to the integrated brand communications. And she taught that actually at Columbia University and a core management class at Wharton. Now, Anne holds an MBA from the Wharton School and an MA in International Studies from the Lauder Institute at the University of Pennsylvania, as well as an PhL in management from Cambridge University. So we are very excited to hear how Anne is embracing the aspects of communications in today's business field. Anne, take it away, dear.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. What a pleasure to be here today with all these brilliant women. It always gives me great pleasure. And one of the greatest joys of my job at Vivaldi is really coaching younger women entering the workforce or in the early stages of their careers. So that's something that I really enjoy a lot. And so here is, since we are a tight group here, I will take the liberty of sharing perhaps some of the tips or advice that I often share with younger women. And you'll see that there are a lot of connection points to what was just covered. The first one, and I really believe in it from the depths of my heart, is don't speak at people, speak with people. And I think that's one of the points that was just covered about communicating versus connecting. I think if we cannot connect with each other, then everything else is really lost. interestingly to me, this is a key aspect of interpersonal communication, but also of marketing, because there is really nothing worse than, even as a brand, if you go out and talk at consumers in today's world, especially among Gen Zers, this just will not be well received. So the interesting piece is that when we think about intergenerational communication, that applies just in everyday work culture, but just the very same points and advice actually applies to brands trying to connect and communicate with younger generations and Gen Zers. So the best of our work is done collaboratively. I truly believe that. My ideas are never as good as the ideas that we come up with in a group with my colleagues. Plus, it makes it a lot of fun, and it's a lot more motivating for me. And so I think that if we approach every work situation, every challenge with that kind of mindset, how can we problem solve together? I always tell my team members, I am not your boss. I actually say I'm your friend, because to me, I say to kids that I'm their friends. I know that's sometimes considered bad parental advice, but like you, Loretta, I don't shy away from things that are not considered acceptable. And so I like to be a friend both to my kids and to my team members. I am their biggest cheerleader and supporter. And so I think one of the most important things we can do for intergenerational communications is really truly connect and come up with solutions together, rather than placing ourselves in a position where we try to solve it all. And in the similar brands, that's what the most successful brands to do today. We have a whole study at Vivaldi of how interactions create values, and how through interactions and exchange, we are actually able to solve the biggest problems of our day, such as some of the problems of equity, for instance, that you are referring to, that we were not able to solve before. So one of the types of work that is most near and dear to my heart is the work on equity in education. And we work on that with a lot of our clients. And of course, there is absolutely no way to solve some of those tough issues by somebody just coming up with a strategy in an office. This can only be done through radical listening, in dialogue, and through very careful consideration. And it requires a skill that has become very rare, but can actually be cultivated through reading and literature and studying of past generations, which is the skill of putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes and the ability to see the world from their eyes. And so that's really my biggest point. That's why I could relate so much to what was just said about connecting, not communicating, because that's, I think, what we need to do as professionals. And that's the advice that we give to brands. So if that is my first point, and the second point I always make is, if it was easy, it would have already been done. So I think the career challenges that young women face in the workforce today are humongous and still continue to be actually quite important. And similarly, there's all kinds of issues, of course, that our clients are facing in the marketplace as well. Unfortunately, we're dealing with a world that is becoming more complex. And so our work is certainly cut out for us. So I think we can only approach this with curiosity and appetite for problem solving, and not getting discouraged when things don't go our way, which inevitably happens. And we know from education that is really what we call growth mindset. And inevitably, I see my role as a leader to really coach professionals to not get their spirits down when something difficult happens, because it will. If there is one prediction that I have, is that challenges will happen and difficulties will happen. And so if it was easy already, it would have been done. So I think we can just put our hands together and try to roll up our sleeves and solve these challenges, because we certainly cannot expect to have a smooth path, and certainly not in difficult issues such as equity, in gender and all other aspects in education as well as in the workforce. That's my second point. My third point is really, if you don't care, nobody will. And that's one of the values that I try to cultivate with my clients and also with my teams. I care deeply about my teams, to the point that was made earlier about connecting at the beginning of a meeting. I believe in bringing all your creativity to the table in the workforce. I think the days when you are supposed to check in your personality at the door and show up in a suit and looking just like everybody else are gone. And today, in order to be creative, in order to solve those difficult problems that if they had been easy, that would have been solved already. We truly need to bring all our personality to the table. Now, all our minds are shaped differently. And what a great advantage we have to bring these uniquely shaped minds to those very difficult problems. So I always look for the quirkiness. I always look for the different perspective, or for the team members that see things differently. And myself, to the points that were made in this brilliant group of people, I don't shy away from appearing different, and in some cases, even perhaps iconoclastic. But those differences of opinion are really what forges discussion. And I think showing deep care about the unique challenges of each person, each team member, and ultimately each client who can also be facing difficult issues in their own industry is really what success is. I always say the buck stops with me, but I hope that every team member that I'm working with shares the same degree of ownership, that if there is a problem, I step up to it and I own it, because if we don't care, then nobody else will. And my fourth and final point before I stop is that learning is life, and if learning stops, life stops. So I think we're all compelled today to really learn on an ongoing basis. And one of the continuous fascination of my career, and one of the things that I really cultivate and also enjoy sharing with some of the younger women in the workforce, is that there are so many new fascinating phenomena. So I certainly cannot apply skills that I learned 20 years ago at business school, but rather learning occurs every day. And listening to this great group of people actually today gave me the idea that I should literally allocate time in my week to learning, because so many times we just go through the week in a very task-focused way. And yet ultimately, our success is determined not just our ability to tick boxes, by our ability to bring unique ideas, again, to problems that haven't been solved before. And that's advice that we at Vivaldi also give, obviously, to our brands who come up with innovation ideas. And that's also advice that I give to young women in the workforce.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you. Yay, clap, clap, clap. Thank you, Anne. Wonderful. You said so many things that were so profound. And if anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, again, unmute yourself and we'll just have a real viable discussion about this. What's really critical, and I think that resonated with me, is what you said about how you always have that space for learning, that it's always, every opportunity is a learning opportunity, no matter what age, what generation, what level you are, there are always spaces of learning. And I think that's really critical. My question to you is, how do you handle those that are in mature states that feel that they know it and they can't learn from the younger generation? How do you address that?
And that's a really tough problem, because obviously we see it really every day. So I would actually say one of the things that I've learned is to look at every individual in their own right. And I think everyone here can appreciate that our minds are so uniquely shaped that they may or may not be influenced by factors such as our age or where we come from or anything else. So I certainly see a lot of older professionals who are very open to new ideas. Our CEO is actually one of them. He's a visionary, and his recent book really opened my eyes in a lot of ways on interaction fields. And I see certainly some younger professionals who maybe, perhaps because of the way they were educated, kind of really focused on the straight and narrow and just kind of progressing and doing things or learning things the way they were done before in an established way. So I think it's really difficult. There are techniques from the acting world or the education world where we train ourselves to step out of our comfort zone and gradually work on removing the fear, because I think it's really a question of fear. Our fear about our inability to deal with this new world, or perhaps to succeed in it, when we don't have the well-known crutches that we've used for our own life. And I know it can be terrifying for anyone. I know it can be for me if we kind of let go of those crutches. And yet I think this is something that we all need to learn how to do. So, I think honestly, if somebody is not open to new ideas, the worst thing we can do is to be judgmental. The best thing is to approach this with the utmost care and compassion and really help that person get away from their fears and get out of their comfort zone.
Excellent, excellent. So I have another question. In an article entitled "Understanding and Managing Intergenerational Conflict, an Examination of Influences and Strategies," and it was authored just last year. One of the things they're saying that within a generation of co-workers, the perception of one another can lead to indifferences. So what might you have seen as some of those indifferences or intergenerational conflicts of interest?
Yeah, I think that is really so interesting because I think, and these are the problems that I see in the world of education also as well, that we live in a world of shifting patterns. And one of the shifting patterns in transitioning from a world where you had to do certain things to a world of opportunity where you've had the choice and therefore you really have to decide what makes sense and what doesn't. So in education, we work a lot from the shift from I have to I want to. And I believe the same shift has to happen in the workplace, because in the past generations, there was a sense that you just had to do certain things, you just had no choice. And the reality is in today's market, that workers and the new generation have a lot of opportunities. So I think it's always coming back to the motivation and almost the purpose of the biggest question that I have to ask of anyone working with us, or really at the beginning of every project, is why. Because if we can determine the why, if I cannot understand what your motivation is or make it interesting for you, then we cannot do great work, because we can only do great work if we're all motivated on by those bigger purposes. And so obviously this is a very purpose-driven generation. And I think one of the things we can learn from this generation is to always ask the why question and not rely so much on the need to tick some boxes, because the old days of I like to call train spotting, of the old days of just kind of getting a car and a house and a washing machines. This is not motivating to anyone anymore. We really have to provide bigger opportunities. And to the younger generation, it often means changing the world. So if we can't articulate how a given project, brand, or opportunity is world changing, I think there is no discussion to be had with the younger generation. I wonder if that's everyone else's experience.
Yeah. So anyone else have any comments, some additional concerns, or chime
I just
in?
wanted to comment, express my gratitude, particularly what you said about what you learned 20 years ago in business school didn't even help you in the work world. I work in higher ed, and I often reflect on what I did when I got my doctorate makes no difference and didn't prepare me for the teaching life that I have now. And I've transited to teaching online, and I've worked on teams where the team leader used to work for Google, and he was directing our teaching, and his life and our lives were so different, and we're all thrown together, and we're working in this, conveyor belt. And education and how to teach on the graduate level was never taught us how to be on a conveyor belt. Yet that's our environment. But my question is, do you think this is true in other industries? Because you and I have a shared experience in education.
In education, yeah, and it's really interesting to listen to your experience, because as you were speaking, I was thinking, wow, I really would hope that through the work that we do in education right now, the next generations don't feel like they learn nothing to prepare them for their jobs, right? And to the previous speaker of saying, ultimately, if we teach something, does that actually help that person get a job? And I go even further. Do we in some way equip them to have a meaningful, successful life, however they define success and meaning on their terms, right? Because if we don't, the technical knowledge obviously evolves so fast. There is very little of it that we can use, but the meta skills, the problem solving skills, the inquiry skills, the ability to test boundaries and challenge in a respectful way, those sort of things still continue applying. So I do think that, funnily enough, we see the same shift happening in nearly all the industry. So my perspective is that we are fortunate to live in this amazing time where we see some of those kind of boundaries are challenged and barriers are broken, which is, of course, the very important work that everybody on this call is doing here today. But we have an opportunity to really change these things. And I see this happening in almost every industry where there are disruptors coming in, there are new business models out there, and there is the new workforce coming in. And that really challenges management to adopt very different views and to really look at things in a new way.
Ginger, you have unmute yourself, Ginger. Unmute, there you go.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Ginger Davis, I'm the managing partner of Untold Story LLC. I'm also the president of a not-for-profit called the Sickle Cell Thalassemia Patients Network. Just to chime in on, the issues with education and the corporate, the private or public sector. We're finding the same thing, that students are coming out of college unprepared for the workforce. And, what we're realizing is that the professors, if they're in the classroom and not also working in the industry, they're behind what's actually happening in the marketplace. And so our, company and our organization, when we do things, we're planning a conference right now to happen in June, and we're doing it on a college campus. We're partnering with two of the schools, a nursing school, School of Pharmacy. We're inviting other schools within the campus to join the conversation. And we are also giving opportunities for both high school and college students to do internships within the industry, whether it's not-for-profit or in the health industry, so they begin to see what is really happening out there. And also that experience is going to say, do you really want to do this? Because a lot of times students are in college, they get their degree, but they end up working in something absolutely different because they're chasing a paycheck. And so what we want to do is actually to start a pathway into the area that they want to enter in health by providing them with internships. And the last thing that also does is to allow them to see there is more than just one way to do that job. For instance, in nursing, you don't just have to go into the hospital. Now you can go into the pharmaceutical industry and you can become a nurse coordinator for a clinical trial. If you're a doctor, you can do research. You can go into subspecialties. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing dealing with pediatric or adult population, but there are so many different options. And when I speak to medical students, I usually tell them, hey, we would like you to consider becoming double board certified in both pediatric and adult care, or double board certified in internal medicine and some subspecialty, because populations are growing, especially in the rare disease market, and there are not enough subspecialists to handle this growing population. So, I thank you very much, because this is a very interesting conversation, and I'm glad that I was able to make it.
Thank you so much, Ginger. We're glad to have you, and thank you for that information. So what is really wonderful that I'm hearing, and what I appreciate about this aspect of the dialogue, is that there's work to be done, multiple levels of work to be done, and that communication not only is critical, but is paramount for us to move forward, even as a society. There has to be a relationship development where we can pull these resources of communication skills together, that we have an understanding, and to help people go to the next level in their lives. I want to share with you a little story of mine. I started college at the age of 40, and I started with young people that actually were young enough to be my daughters and sons. But the wonderful thing about that, and this is all I want to share about young people, because I hear so many times negative things about them. They embraced me even as an old lady. I hung out with them. My best friend in college, and this is 1997, was 20 years old. And she was my best friend. And her mother thought, no, nothing's going on. We're just buds. But the interesting thing about that is you can develop those interpersonal relationships that'll transition into conversations for intercultural relationships that can develop into corporate discourses. And I think that's the key. And give us your last words.
Well, it's just fascinating for me to learn. What a chance for me to learn from this this brilliant group of women. And Ginger, thank you so much. I think you're doing really important work. I think we all share the passion of making education really relevant for everyone and making sure everyone has access to that. And I agree with Loretta, we have still a lot of work ahead of us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ann. And that is what JazzyJZ is all about. We're mentoring young women, and we're doing it one woman at a time. As a matter of fact, the president of our board of trustees is a former JazzyJZ recipient. And she's been with us for about 7 years, and she's moved into the ladder that now she is the president of our board, and she's so cute. She's nervous, but we have to start grooming new leaders. Equity comes when we're in a position to develop equity, and I'm excited about that. Our next guest speaker, which is our special guest speaker, and I'm so excited. I'm excited. Dr. Weinbaum, Batya Weinbaum, is an American poet, feminist, artist, editor, professor, in addition to founding the Femspec journal, for which she is editor. She's published 5 books, numerous articles and essays, and a wide-ranging variety of publications. She has taught in multiple universities, prestigious universities around the country, from Cleveland State University to Pacifica Graduate Institute. She has taught in women and gender studies at Virginia Polytech Institute. So we are excited, and we just give the floor and our hearts. Dr. Weinbaum, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. I sound pretty good. I don't. This conversation has been absolutely fascinating, and I'm going to start off by saying I wish I could just throw out what I prepared to talk, but and start off with everything I heard. But I'm going to try to stick to the program a little bit. I'm going to give a talk about metacommunication, which is television, and how the representation of women in television has changed over the last 50, 60, 70 years, because I think it's important. Somebody said something about getting in the shoes of other people and being able to get in the shoes of different generations. And I think television offers that opportunity cross-generationally, intergenerationally. We can watch what it's like for younger people in the workplace by watching the newer shows, and younger people can watch what it's like for older people by watching the older shows. And in addition to that, we started off protesting in the 70s, in the 60s, that there were either women weren't in the shows, you know, like Rawhide, and or the representation of women was only in traditional roles. And so the first thing that we had was a lot of protests to change the roles of women. And I'm going to start off my presentation now. And if you're really interested in it, you can read the full essay in a book, which is, the title is given down here. So the first wave of protest in the 60s and 70s led to the creation of something called the New Woman, which is something where you had women actually participating in work. So just to pull the thread of how women started to enter the workplace. Feminist television analysis started to work on this concept called the New Woman. I don't know if people remember, but there was a show called the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which was a spin-off from the Dick Van Dyke Show, which showed between 1961 and 1966. And they actually took the character, Mary Tyler Moore, who had been a housewife in the Dick Van Dyke Show, and gave her her own show, which aired from 1970 to 1977. And in that show, she worked, but the workplace was merely a background to her series of relationships that she was in. And the men had fantasies about her, and they all wanted to marry her.
Yes, that's what she refers to the.
So that's called the New Woman Show. And then we had a development of a new kind of show called the New Woman Show, which was a concept made up by Amanda Lotz in television criticism. And in this kind of show, which is typified by Law and Order Special Victims Unit and Xena the Warrior Princess, which ran from 1995 to 2001, the woman is working, and working is primary, and they're actually breaking the gender roles. You know, Xena the Warrior Princess, you could say it was flawed by the fact that her long legs were showing, and she had high boots, and she had a lot of cleavage, but at least her involvement in fighting and her fighting the battles was real and genuine. And you could also criticize the Law and Order Special Victims Unit, that Olivia Benson was beautiful, and you know, she dated a series of men, she became a mother. The fact that she was a rape victim and beautiful was all very part of the plot. Yet from the start, work was no longer just a background for boyfriends and familial sexual issues for the main characters in either one of these shows, but quite the reverse, and work issues became primary. And then you had the evolution of the new woman, which is this N3 category that I've been making up. That shows the evolution from pre-feminist, where women were unquestioningly in traditional gender roles, like in the Dick Van Dyke Show, to proto-feminist, where women began to break out of the roles, which you could see like in the I Love Lucy show, where she was still home, but she kept trying to get Ricky to let her come out and do stuff in the nightclub, and he would, Lucy, you know, and would make fun of her, but she was trying to break out of the gender role. And then you had feminist emerging, like Prime Suspect with Helen Mirren, and Murder, She Wrote with the famous character she was an amateur solver of crimes, but throughout the Angela Lansbury character who played the character Jessica Fletcher, would keep solving problems and telling the police what was really going on. So she was dedicated to solving crimes. So the feminist emerging shows were happening. But in this new woman shows, women are finding that they're not just breaking into work, but they're finding mentors in work. And they're connecting with women who've already established in work. So if you see shows like movies like The Devil Wears Prada, it's all about this young woman who comes into work and she has a woman boss, or the Superwoman show that was a series on ABC, and you could see it in CW. She comes in and she has a woman boss. So and another thing that happens in the new woman shows is the shows show women's issues are being organized around, and there's evidence that women are even reading books by women and by feminists. And in one of the shows that's would be a new woman show, I just call it N3 in the article. Mindy, the Mindy Project, she makes Mindy, the main character, makes the reference to that girl who dressed up like a bunny and went into the underground and you know, worked in the Playboy Club. She's really talking about Gloria Steinem. So there's evidence that feminism has already existed by the time you watch the shows. So these shows are post-feminist, and by post-feminist, women in my generation bristled when that term started to be turned to, you know, coming into common parlance. It doesn't mean at all that we don't need feminism anymore. All it means is that there's evidence that feminism had already occurred in these shows. Now, the reason why there's evidence that feminism has already occurred is that many of the women writing the shows are feminists. So we're no longer outside protesting the industry, that the industry changed, but we're inside writing the scripts ourselves, and we're inside directing and producing the shows ourselves, which was a mammoth change in the industry. And so is it relevant? Yes, of course it's relevant that these shows have changed. And one of the major relevancies that is the intersectionality of the new women shows. Instead of being all about white women, we have a whole series of you know, African-American women, Latina women. Scandal was a big show that would be considered N3, with Olivia Pope being the basic, you know, character, and everybody works for her as a team. She's in charge of everything, and she solves all the problems, and everybody defers to her as the captain and the leader. And she's, you know, very well off, very established, and has a beautiful apartment. And then there's Grey's Anatomy, which shows, you know, a woman, Bailey, is the head of the hospital. And so, you know, and at one point in the hospital, there's a woman who had experienced sexual trauma, and, you know, she didn't want to go to surgery. So all the women in the hospital come and line the corridors to make the woman feel safe going down the corridor. Well, this would never have happened, you know, in the early days of television, that a feminist issue would be so embedded in the organization of the script that women would be acting out, making it safe for women to come down to surgery. And, you know, you have a woman surgeon. And there are other ways in which the films become intersectional, which was actually a term made up by Pat Collins, an African-American woman, to show the intersection of class and race and gender, and that many factors lead to discrimination. So in these films and these television shows, many factors come together to start defining who the main characters are, and to define what the issues are that are being revealed in the plots. So the Mindy Project was written by a Indian American woman, and she wrote the project for herself. She was a comedian. She is a comedian, very vibrant. In that show, there are many issues. Like there's a male nurse, for example, and the secretary that she hires is older, and so ageism comes up, and whether gender has to be defined by the sex roles, and only men can be doctors and only women can be nurses. That traditional role is blown wide open. So I Zoom teach, so I'm just in the habit of admitting everybody. So, so intersectionality is a big thing. And I want to mention Jane the Virgin, and I stopped timing myself. So if I'm near the end of my talk, I should probably be told. But Jane the Virgin is a very interesting intersectional N3 television show. It actually started off as a show in Venezuela, which was imported to the United States, and now it's produced all over the world, and there are local versions in many countries around the world. But it's not just one character. She's a character that lives in a household with her mother and her grandmother, and the grandmother had been a Venezuelan immigrant. So it's 3 generations of immigrant. 3 generations of Latinas, and it shows the struggle of all of them. And it's a very matriarchal centered culture, and they all interact in the house, and they all interact in the porch, and it's following all of their lives, not just Jane's life. But from the very beginning, it's post-feminist in the sense that feminism shows, because she's inseminated by mistake by a woman gynecologist who inseminates the wrong person. But you don't have the struggle to get women into work. You have women already being in work. And so there are many ways in which that show is intersectional, many ways in which it's showing the issues of feminism already fought, and in the end she publishes a book and gets success, but she starts off working as a waitress, so class issues are all the way through all of the seasons of the show as well. So that's like from the beginning of television, you had women being middle-class wives. And so the evolution throughout these, 72 years now of television that I've been talking about, and I've mentioned a few movies. We could also look at news has evolved. We used to have, Walter Cronkite being a white man dressed in a suit and talking in an authoritarian voice. And now we have Rachel Maddow, who goes on and on about her girlfriend, and is very out about being a lesbian. Well, that's very post-feminist and very N3. So with that, I will stop because I probably talked beyond my 10 minutes. And I do think that these things I want to say have an effect on viewers. I've taught media and the impact of media in many different courses. And I've taught people who grew up watching Xena warrior women, and both men and women were very impacted by seeing this mythical woman warrior into thinking about gender roles differently. And I will close on this one point, that when women started being the forensic investigators on the crime shows and wearing the white coats, there was research done in the field of popular culture. The number of women in the field of medical forensics skyrocketed because those women had seen women wearing coats and working in morgues, and they got the idea that they could do it too. This is a mammoth way to communicate, and that's why so many women have gone into the industry and networked and fought for their right to be directors and producers as well as actresses. And so, is that my 10 minutes, Loretta? Should I stop?
If you want to go on, I'm fascinated. Please go on.
Okay, so one thing I want to say is this didn't happen automatically. The change in television. I did mention that there was fighting among the second wave women who were protesting that there should be changes in the image of women, and that's how we got the Mary Tyler Show in the beginning. And I kind of alluded to the fact that there was organization to get women directors, and usually they would start off doing pilot shows or doing episodes like in Dexter, where there were women. Dexter was a serial murderer, but his sister they were both children of somebody who worked in the police force, and she became a police officer herself. So, a woman would write that script, and then she would get the credential that she'd worked on one script, and then she would fight in an organization. Hollywood became very organized. So it didn't happen automatically that women started writing these female-centered, feminist, intersectional scripts. That happened because there was fighting about it. There was organization. And the same thing with the integration of getting, like Latina characters. That happened because there was fighting about the fact that Latinas were only appearing in stereotypes. And you can also read about the evolution of the roles of Black women in television and movies. There was always organization to challenge those stereotypes that were being presented. So you have to realize that what's being communicated now to people through the meta communication of television has changed. And some people think it's just a passive consumption, and perhaps some of the younger generation doesn't even think it's important what's communicated through television at all. But I happen to think it's very important. I don't know how many of you have a streaming habit, and how many of you go to bed with your little devices, streaming the latest show that comes out. I'm currently hooked on the last couple of seasons of Call the Midwife. And so I think that it's a massive form of communication that makes it possible for women to learn about other generations of feminists. And so I think it's an important vehicle for us to learn how to communicate with each other. And it's important to realize that was organization. And even the actresses have been organizing, not only for their own pay raise, but Jane the Virgin, the main actress in that, organized to become a director of her own show during the last season. And the director, the original director and producer, had worked in previous feminist shows. She had a policy that, certain number of camera women had to be hired each time. So what we see in the evolution of the images also was happening in the evolution of who was shooting the shows, literally who was filming the shows. And this is phenomenal in the history of Hollywood and television. So, there's a lot going on behind the scenes as well as what's going on in the viewing that we see. And a lot of this is attributed also to the stopping of advertising and the fact that people are consuming by paying their monthly fees to buy these different streaming rights, so that we don't have to have the advertising that we used to have. So the producers of commodities aren't controlling what we see. We're buying ourselves what we're seeing, and a lot of people are voting for more progressive images, both of women and of minority groups. So I'll stop there. I know there's probably a lot of questions or reflections.
Absolutely. Thank you, Doctor. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, but one of the things I want to bring up, you brought up the subject matter of intersectionality, and this is a really big, hot topic, although it's an old topic. I mean, it's something that we've been discussing for we're going into our second, third generation and talking about this. But one of the things I wanted to share is Gloria Steinem. She stated that a feminist is anyone who responds responds to the equity of the fullness of humanity, be it male or female. Within a place of intersectionality, how can feminism, or how shall feminism move the pendulum forward when we have a generation that generally identifies that it appears that the issues that are concerning society began with them?
What's your question? How can feminists move the society forward for everybody? Is that your question?
That's basically, yeah, because we know what the definition of feminism is. We know what the definition of intersectionality is. We know how they've integrated into moving things forward. But we have a generation now, because of new technology and the way they discourse, have a tendency of believing that they are the ones that are moving the conversations forward without the lineage attached to it. How can we support that move by adding that extra component that seems to have disappeared?
The component of intersectionality?
Yeah.
You think that's disappeared?
No, I think the way it's being discoursed.
Yeah, it's being watered down.
Yeah.
It's becoming a hip hype thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm very dedicated to teaching, and I'm like very dedicated to making people read history. And I'm not too comfortable with the evolution of the field of women and gender studies, because I think a lot of the history that you're referring to is being written out. And I once recently was in the process of being hired to teach an intro to women's and gender studies course, and they wanted me to teach a course in which the entire first and second wave were supposed to be taught in 1 week. Which, didn't give room to teach the evolution of, the women's movement out of the civil rights movement, and the crossover between the early leaders of the SNCC and how that led to the style of organizing. And the way you couldn't teach all that if you had to teach the whole first and second wave in 1 week. And so, there's been a collapsing of history, which is pitiful. So I didn't teach there. I found it impossible to accept the limitations of the happening in academia. So many of us are creating alternative forms of education. I work with this organization called Women's Declaration International, and we've started our own. Every Saturday there are webinars that are given, just through the organization that women can come to. And then on Sunday mornings, there are other webinars that people can come to, and they have their own web YouTube channel. So there's a lot of radical feminist education, reading the early books like This Bridge Called My Back, and having discussions about the early material that nobody's reading anymore.
Yeah.
Because they're being written out of curriculum. So I'm in favor of teaching the old stuff to keep it all in the plate and keep it on the menu, and reading Collins, reading the original documents. There's a new film out about the Furies, which was one of the early feminist publications that came out in DC, and a lot of stuff is archived online if you can find anybody to teach it to you. All of Heresies is up online, and unfortunately, people are used to learning everything in 140 characters. So to get anybody to read an entire book is a feat. But this last year, I've been teaching study groups internationally and getting people to read entire books. So that's one of my missions and goals, is to get people to read the classics.
Wonderful, wonderful. Gina, you have your hand up. What was your question, dear? So comment.
Gina here.
Reading is fundamental. I started my children loving to read real early. It's interesting. You mentioned Gloria Steinem and intersectionality and, inclusion. When she turned 60 and looking back on her life, she said she wasn't actually intersectional or inclusion. I've watched the first, the second, studied like reading, the first, the second, and now the third wave of feminism still marginalizes Black and women of color. Katie Stanton was the only one who stood up with the suffragettes to say we needed to include Black women. When they were talking about giving Black men the right to vote, they excluded Black women, and the party split because she stood up, for marginalized women. In the 60s, Black and Latino other women of color were not included. And I'm watching the same thing happen with the Me Too movement, and where there's this attitude that unfortunately, some white women say to Black women who they should and should not look up to as leaders. and telling people to disavow or disown their leaders. But that conversation, those kind of statements should not be happening in a feminist movement. So when you're talking about teaching, no, you cannot teach feminism in 2 weeks. And that in and of itself, for anyone to ask for this history to be taught in 2 weeks is not really considering that our young people learn about the life of a woman and our many aspects and all the trials and tribulations. So, how do we really create intersectionality and create honest dialogue and inclusion in talking about, being a feminist and what that is, what it means today to be a feminist?
So, and I remember when I was in the 70s, being a young activist, being mentored by Flo Kennedy. And, I remember that she was the one that was the brains behind the Speak Out Against Abortion, and that she was the one, I recommend reading Color Me Flo. I mean, my lived experience was so different than the way history is told, that there were no Black women activists. She was the mentor of many of us because she came out of the civil rights movement. That's why I'm saying I couldn't teach not only in 2 weeks, in 1 week, the history of the second wave, because the intersectionality of where the knowledge was coming from about how to do grassroots organizational work, it was coming from the women who had been leaders in the civil rights movement, and those women were African American. They were women of color, and they were actually teaching many of us. I mean, I was on the collective at Brooklyn College that we got a grant to do the Women Returning to College Project Chance, and Wilmette Brown from the Black Panthers was on our group, and Digna Sanchez from the Puerto Rican Socialist Party was on our group, and we went to the Sisterhood of Black Single Mothers. They were on our board, and we presented and they gave us input. And so so what you say is true, and these other things were happening, but they've been written out of history. Nobody knows about them because they were not written about, let alone talked about. So my anecdotes are coming from the mouth of a white woman, but these were things these are organizations and people that existed back in that time also. So how did all that disappear? How did all that history disappear?
Yeah.
I don't know.
They don't write the books, and the people who were involved with those movements are really not the ones writing them. And then it's men writing the books. I mean, when you look at Dr. Doris Weathers and Dr. Jeannie Francis, they are the founders of the newborn screening program that is saving hundreds of millions of infants' lives by doing metabolic screening at birth to see if they have an inherited disorder. These are two Black women that invented this. And when you look at a lot of inventions that are meaningful, even in today's society, they're created by Black men and women. There's no mention of them doing that, save, maybe Garrett Morgan and George Washington Carver, but there are so many people that did so many things. And I think it's, I thank you because, just say here and talk about your lived experiences. We have to write those stories.
Absolutely. And I also think, I'm sorry, go ahead, doctor.
No, I was just saying that it's not there because we're not doing it. So I guess we have to put more work on our plates, and we have to do it.
We also have to put it on YouTube and find other outlets, talk about communication, because I find that people don't read books. We have to we have to write the stories, but we have to put it out in social media forms that people actually use. I mean, I recently got on Twitter because the women in one of my study groups were always quoting these women that were on Twitter. And so I thought maybe there was a reason to get on Twitter. I still don't use it, but at least I read it. But how do you put all this stuff on Twitter? I don't know.
It's constant. It's like you just keep tweeting it. So, we put out information about genetic trials. Clinical trials. Nobody reads the articles. So I have to break them down into multi-page memes. So give it a great title and then 3 or 4, 5, 6 slides and put critical information across those slides for them actually to be read in social media. And yeah, we have to turn stuff into videos, and we have to have monthly meetings and put this stuff out in the community. We need you to learn about this because we need you to participate. And we have to do all of this other stuff to get that information across because people don't read.
Right. So one of the things I want to share with you ladies, and I think it's a wonderful conversation you're having, you're still talking about grassroots. You're still talking about on the ground. And you're also talking about intercultural communication skills, because what you're doing is transitioning what you know from your lived history onto current context. And the way it's going to be done is you have to use the new platforms that are available. So I suggest that Ginger and you and Doctor get together and teach each other how to pull that off and do that thing. I'm all for it. Are there any more questions, comments, and concerns before we close out? Well, we want to thank you, ladies. Thank you, all of our discussants.
Loretta.
Yes, dear.
I had a question that was in the chat. I wanted to ask.
I'm sorry, Ronnie. Go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
Okay. And I know I came in late to the party, but my question is, with all the stuff that's going on with the current politics, how do we continue, or how do we get this to move forward with the intergenerational stuff? Because it seems like we're starting to go backwards with what's going on in the world today, with what you see on the news about people of color and the attacks on all the different people of color.
Well, I'd love to address that because, I'm always talking about that. Number one, we have to realize what cracks me up and concerns me in the same time. And when I say crack up, I'm saying not on the funny side, but what people of color are going through now is no different than 100 years ago or 150 years ago. Let's get it real. Think about it. 100 years ago,
Correct.
right here in Harlem, there was 10,000 Black folk got together and walked against lynching. Just 2 weeks ago, here in the United States, they passed the anti-lynching law. Give me a break. It took 100 years to pass that law. Now, it was a woman who helped to initiate that law, Ida B. Wells Burnett, because she started writing about it in her magazine before Du Bois and the NAACP picked it up. Again, a woman who helped initiate it, but a man grabbed it and flew with it. Okay, so I'm just saying. So one of the things we have to look at is we can't look at ourselves as being overwhelmed. We got to go back to the old landmark. Here it goes, Dr. Weinberg. We gotta study, show ourselves approval. The history is there. The methodologies are there. Study it. Let's amplify it and see how it can work. During the Black Lives Matters program, a young lady came to me and go, Mom, we need motivation. What are some of the theories? I gave her a bibliography of books to read and told her, don't come back until you read them. If you don't have a theoretical construct, a methodological framing, how can you go forward?
Correct.
So we can't get, calm down. This ain't no new news. It's just new technology.
Do you think it's changing at all when we have Kamala Harris and we have a African-American woman nominee for the Supreme Court? I mean, are those indices of change for women of color or not?
Appearance has changed, the action hasn't.
Right.
Appearance has changed, but the action hasn't. Look what she's going through.
Exactly.
Look what Kamala had to go through. I'm sorry, Ronnie. I just had to say that. I'm sorry.
Yes, and I totally agree, Dr. Weinbaum. It just because we put a person there doesn't mean that they're not torn down. Even just women, period. Look at the other lady that they just tore apart when what's his name? The other Supreme Court justice was up there, and he swore that he didn't do all the things that he was accused
Kavanaugh.
of.
Yeah, Kavanaugh.
With that woman, and how her life was turned. It was like when a woman is put there, then they find a way to break her down, no matter what. So if a man says it, okay, well, it's his way, not the woman. So the woman, no matter what color she is always torn down to put her back into her place, put her back as a second class citizen, almost to say.
Yeah.
I remember teaching I to B. I taught a whole course called Womanism, Feminism at Cleveland State. I mean a whole course, right?
Yeah.
It didn't
Yeah.
used to be in 1 or 2 weeks.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So ladies, we thank you. Gentlemen, we thank you so much for this conversation. We're about to come to a close. What we'd like to do right now is introduce and allow our president of the WOCPSCN's Global Sustainability Partnership to come on, Louis, and tell you some of the things that are happening with WOCPSCN in the next upcoming months.
Hi, thank you, Loretta, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. If I can start by saying this is just another one of the really powerful WOCPSCN's conversations. Loretta has a knack of finding the topics that needs to be addressed, and to bring together amazing people. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your stories, for sharing your expertise. So as Loretta said, I am the president of the Global Sustainability Partnerships. So this has been created on the back of the conference last year, organized by the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce, where we discussed at that time what we thought would be post-COVID, and you know, the impact of COVID on society, and then mentioning the global sustainability goals, so the 17 global sustainability goals. So the first point I want to make is that I sincerely agree that whilst there are 17 goals, the first one, in my opinion, the first 2 ones, actually, in my opinion, should be women equality / equity and human rights, because without those 2, I think these 2 are really at the center of, you know, moving into a more inclusive and a more sustainable world. Before we have these 2, we, you know, figure it out, we can't move forward. So long story short, the global sustainability partnerships have been set up to create global alliances. We touch base on all 17 aspects of the UN global sustainability development goals. Today has been very interesting for me also from that perspective, with obviously Dr. Weinbaum, Ginger Davis, Ronnie, Anne. You all talked about education, about interpersonal, you know, communication, which is really important. Next month, actually this month, next week Wednesday, will be the GSP convene at same time as today. So it's at 10:30 actually, EST time. We will address education. So I hereby invite you all to join us that day, because it would be my honor to have you as speakers even, and to share your expertise. We have, I think, an amazing audience that's already showed interest in those topics. I think we're up about 400 to 500 people that will join us hopefully that day. So please do join us. I will share the link with you. And we also have a summit in June, which I would really be honored for you to join as well. So this is the Global Sustainability Summit, which we called Define Your Legacy. So why? Because obviously I think legacy is one of those words that got lost into translation, coming from a foreigner talking to an international panel just now. But it is really important to me. I've recently lost my dad, so I think legacy as a word, you know, the meaning of legacy has taken another dimension for me, and it's really important to bring that forward for our June summit. in which we will discuss, so we will have 3 panels. The first one being climate, sustainability, and environment. We will have a panel for gender and development, as well as a panel that will discuss health and mental health. So as Loretta knows, and the ones that are familiar with me, I can rattle on for hours if you don't stop me. So this is my short introductions. I'm so happy to have met you all. Please do link with us via LinkedIn, via Facebook. I will share links with you as well to the GSP convenes. I'm so happy to have met you and looking forward to meeting you soon again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Louis. We want to piggyback on what Louis said. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you so much, Dr. Weinbaum. Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you so much, Dr. Corinne. Thank you, Millie, because we know she had to make some great challenges to be here. Thank you all you ladies and gentlemen that have been with us today. We are so excited to have this conversation. This is annual for our JazzyJZ. Please feel free to look at our website, see the work we're doing. It's on the ground work. It really is on the ground work. And that is the importance and the impact of what our goals and objectives are. JazzyJZ is a mentoring program. We want to help this next generation move on without losing our legacy of the work that we've done in the past. So again, we look forward to speaking with you soon. This is recorded and it will be on our website, on YouTube, and of course you all receive a copy. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day and blessings. Take care.
Blessings.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you. Sorry I was late. This is Denise.
Denise, it's so good to see you, girl. Call me.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you so much. Great conversation. Great
Thank
to
you,
meet
Anne. Thank
all.
you so much for your time, sweetie. Thank you. Dr. Weinbaum, can you see how to go out? All righty. Okay. Whew. Another one down.